Good evening and welcome to the Associated Black Charities webinar series, Equity at Work. My name is Chrissy Thornton and I am so excited to be with you on this February 29th, the very last day of Black History Month of 2024. Equity at Work is a series that is meant to help specifically Black professionals navigate structural racism in the workplace. And we are so excited tonight to talk about a wonderful topic, a very important and timely topic, decolonizing the workplace, right? And decolonizing workplace culture. And tonight I am joined by two very esteemed panelists, and at this time we'll ask them to join us on camera.
Hello.
Hello, welcome. Thank you
Good
for joining
evening.
Associated Black Charities. We are so excited to have both of you with us, and I'd like to give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves to tonight's viewing audience and our playback recording viewers as well, but also when doing so, to tell us a little bit about why you believe this conversation tonight about decolonizing corporate culture is so important. And we'll start with you, Shanetta.
All right. Well, good evening, all, and I'm very happy to be here. I've been associated with Associated Black Charities for a long.
Yes.
Um, this is so important to me because it was over 20 years ago when I became a VP, and with all the things that happened during my time, and I'm still mentoring young women and men that are still facing some of the same issues that I faced during that time. And I think now with the political situation that we're going through and seeing what's happening with affirmative action, what's happening with DEIA, it is extremely important to talk about it now because we have to make sure that we find ways for people to get a seat at the table.
Mm-hmm.
Very important. And I think that will be one of the ways that we have to make sure that we can start decolonizing corporate America.
Yes, absolutely. And do you want to share a little bit about your history with Associated Black
I
Charities?
think, well, you know what? I was the board chair for about, I guess, maybe 4 or 5 years. And I was there when Diane was there, Diane Bell McCoy. It's been a pleasure to meet you, Chrissy. I'm really excited about what I see you doing with Associated Black Charities. And it's a great organization. And I hope that you continue to well with the team. And we look forward to all the great things that you're doing in the community.
Thank you so much. Now, I've said this to you in person, and I'm going to say it again. I say this to everyone when they tell me they used to be. Come on back. Come on back. Dr. Andrea, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, well, good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Andrea Davis, and it is a pleasure to be here with you all tonight. Just a little bit about me. I am the Chief Social Scientist and Principal Consultant at ALD and Associates, and we are a diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, and general sort of human capital services consultancy in the DMV area. And I've been doing DEIA. For me, the A again is anti-racism but versus accessibility primarily. I've been doing this work for the last almost 15 years now. So what my educational background, what my doctorate is in. And I'm just so excited that you all were having this conversation tonight because as Janetta said, I mean, it is incredibly timely for so many reasons. And so just having a space where we can kind of talk about not only what decolonization is, but how we actively, both individually and collectively, can sort of be involved in that process is so important due to any number of things from where we are politically, just from an emotional labor standpoint, a wellness standpoint, everything. And I'm just excited to delve into that tonight. And happy last day of Black History Month.
Yes, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to share a little bit of our objectives and information about the topic that we shared earlier, because I know during our conversation today, we do hope to define and come to common understanding of the terminology. But what we wrote was, at its core, decolonizing corporate culture demands a paradigm shift in leadership philosophies, challenging traditional hierarchies and fostering an environment where every voice is not only heard but valued. And this shift towards decolonization is not just a checkbox on diversity and the diversity agenda, but yet a fundamental commitment to creating a corporate landscape that reflects the richness of human experience, about recognizing and dismantling the invisible barriers that limit opportunities, hinder career advancement, and perpetuate unequal power dynamics. Ultimately, the journey to decolonize corporate culture is a collective effort towards building a more just, inclusive, and forward-thinking business world where everyone has an equal chance to thrive and to contribute. So let's talk about corporate culture. Just in general, where we talk about what it is, right? We know corporate culture is a set of values, beliefs, attitudes, behaviors that make up and characterize how a company moves, operates, and how it interacts with its customers, with internally with its employees. What do we know about how corporate culture is traditionally defined? Either of you want to talk just about what you think about that? How has it traditionally been defined, and where does it come from?
I'll start. Now, my background is in the defense industry. I worked at Northrop Grumman, so that's where most of my experience comes from. So I will be talking from that perspective. Um, our culture was because it's a lot of military involved. Our culture was very much so based on how the military moves because we provided radars and things to the military. So that can be very different than a culture where, like, my daughter works in a sports industry. That culture there is very different. It's very different from everything from how you dress to how you handle yourself in meetings. It's a very, very different. So I think we can't have a broad brush to say, that's what culture is. I think it's based on your industry. And that's why I think it's important when you are going to go into a career, you need to understand and do research on what that culture is like, because we can't sit here and say, okay, this is what all cultures are. They're not. Every culture is different based on whatever that particular industry is. So it's good to have an understanding of exactly what is expected within that culture.
Yes. Andrea?
Yeah, and I so agree with that. I mean, I think in addition to that, I do think there are some aspects of culture that sort of apply across the board, particularly when we're thinking about corporate culture within the context of decolonization, right? So I think when we are using that sort of lens to evaluate workplace culture, while like Janetta was saying, there's going to be places that have like a sports like industry culture, defense culture, whatever that may be, due to the specifics of the actual discipline or the industry that you're in. There are still things that apply across the board. There's still a mindset, a way of thinking, sort of that colonized or colonial Eurocentric based thinking that will apply to any workforce. So whether we're talking about just the general power structures, the way policies or programs or procedures are designed, whether we're talking about things like individualism, not hoarding power, stuff like that. Those things will apply across the board in cultures, and I think that's what we need to really consider when we talk about decolonizing, is those aspects that are general.
So it's interesting. When we talk about colonization, of course, we start to think about the founding of our great America here, right? And I remember in the first Black Panther, when one of the characters referred to the white individual in the movie as a colonizer, and we all pretty much had a universal understanding of that. And typically, when we think of the word colonizer, it is an entity or a group of people who seek to establish control, dominance, power, right? And control can be over territory, over resources and people, economically, right? Through politics, through, exploitation or other means. And so when we think of that word, it tends not to necessarily, at least from a Black lens, be positive, right? It tends to be representative of someone who wants to rule and abide and dominate a scenario. And so when we talk about the colonization of corporate culture and how, when we look at that, corporate culture that is highly colonized tends to be steeped in whiteness. What do you think about that? And what does that bring to mind for each of you in your experience?
Well, I think go ahead. You go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Davis.
Okay. So when I think about that, I really think about just eliminating really the vestiges of colonialism, right? And so thinking about what whiteness at work means, for me, it means sort of the thinking about the challenges and undoing the influences of the colonial thinking, colonial whiteness, Eurocentric, kind of fill in the blank with any of those terms. And that's what the decolonization part means for me at work.
Shanetta?
I agree with what she's saying. To be literal about it is you go into an organization, you pull up any organization chart. You can, most of the time, you will be able to see that it is steeped in whiteness in a lot of, especially the ones who are making the decisions. And I think you'll be able to see that. And that's one of the things that when I talk to people about that, the first thing I ask them is, what your organization look like? Do you know that? Because that makes a difference as to whether you see, are you really steeped into whiteness? And that is in a lot of cases. And a lot of people sometimes don't even realize that all the people who are making the decisions, what they look like. And so one of the things that I think that a lot of companies were forced to do or started to do, they had an organization with pictures on them. Because for a long time, many organizations didn't put pictures up. So then they started putting pictures of people. So you did have some idea. And then it became very apparent where the power was within the company.
And now, when it's not so attractive to not be diverse, a lot of companies choose not to put pictures up when the pictures won't paint them in a favorable light.
And that's why people have to say, can we see an organization chart that has pictures on it? It's a very simple thing.
Absolutely. So when we think,
and I think part of the decolonization process, though, is to also even think more about what goes beyond those pictures, right? Because pictures might not paint, or they don't actually paint a full picture of what's going on. And so, yeah, I think tokenism comes into play when you start thinking about those photos that, you know, you go to a company or corporate website, and you would think, a common example is you go to some of these college websites, university websites, you would think it's an HBCU because all the Black folks they have on a homepage. Like, no, this is just, who did this? Obviously, this type of iconography or this type of photography was for a purpose, right? And tokenism, I think, has really become such a significant issue in the workplace, both in the, you know, actual just the visual sense, they're talking about these photos, but also in the way that certain people get sort of paraded in certain positions.
Yes, absolutely. So we're talking about colonized culture in workplaces, and that tends to show up as having a dominance of white perspectives, specifically in leadership and decision-making positions, as Shanetta mentioned, right? It tends to show up as a lack of representation, lack of diversity among the employees. It may be a corporate culture that does not highlight or reflect diverse backgrounds or even value diverse experiences. It may be a culture that is heavy in microaggressions and workplace discrimination, and one where employees feel a lot of pressure to conform, right? So now we're talking about assimilation. I was speaking to a staff group earlier today, and we talked a little bit about what it meant to have to feel invisible in the workplace, and the toll that carries on someone when they cannot authentically show up and share who they are in their workplace. And so I'd love to just talk a little bit about your personal experience, and then we'll circle back to some other topics. But I'm someone who built my career primarily in white spaces, in colonized culture. And I know firsthand how difficult it can be as a Black employee to navigate that successfully, right? There can be some pressures to assimilate in order to be acceptable enough to grow your career. There can be consequences for not doing so. And I just love to hear from both of you. We'll start with Dr. Davis, Andrea, about your personal lived experience with either working, surviving, thriving, or leaving, perhaps, a culture in a workplace that needed decolonization.
Oh man, how much time do we have? You know, I too have really built my career in predominantly white spaces, and not just my career, my educational experiences outside of my 4 years at an HBCU were almost exclusively white. And with that, came a lot of consequences, right? And so one thing that I have really tried to do for myself to protect myself and to promote myself, like all of that, just within these very white spaces, is to practice authenticity, but to also be willing and take an active involvement in unlearning what I thought was right or what I thought was professional, what I thought was unprofessional, because so many of those concepts are steeped in whiteness, white racial realities, and they don't apply to me in the same way, right? But I'm just trying to navigate or survive, like you said, or even thrive in these spaces. So sort of deconstructing various aspects of white supremacy culture within the workplace. So whether it is power hoarding or either or thinking or sort of worship over the written word you hear a lot versus like the verbal word, things like that. Just reframing my own personal narrative about that and then doing my part to share that with other Black folks in particular in my space. That has been crucial to my own personal and professional development. But I'd say, when I think about what's the sort of biggest way that I've really tried to kind of decolonize the workplace, I would say it was a personal act, a personal act of resistance, and that was resignation, like resignation
Wow.
as an act of resistance. For me, getting out of the sort of formal workplace and then branching out on my own, which I recognize is a privilege to even have that option, but just to actually go forth with that and use resignation as an act of resistance to what I was experiencing and what I was saying has been so powerful for me, and hopefully for others too, who I have been able to connect with and mentor and bond with over my career.
And so we'll talk a little bit later about maybe some of the attempts that you employed or deployed to decolonize before you resorted to resignation, because we'd love to hear more about that. But Shanana, what is your lived experience with this issue?
So I think mine too has been in pretty much so white world. I actually started out at Morgan, but then I was transferred to Johns Hopkins in engineering. I never met another Black person except one Black male the whole time I was there. So I joke with people and say, I got a very tough skin as a result of doing that. And then when I went to, it was Westinghouse before Northrop Grumman, it was mainly all white males and it's the engineering world. So I felt that I had to get really, really tough hide or whatever to be able to survive in that world. So probably being at Hopkins helped me a lot because I had to study. I had labs and things that I had guys, they didn't even want to work with me because I was Black or whatever. So but you do what you have to do so that you get through. So I found that when you finally are able to get a place at the table, then you got to help bring other people along. So I think that's one of the things that I tried to do was that when I got into a position where I could help to bring other people along, I did. But one of the things I want to talk about, you talk about something that personal that happens, and it happens a lot when you're trying to make people aware that you're visible and that you should be seen. And this just happened to me last week at a meeting that I was in with one of the committees that I sit on. I made a comment at the meeting, and maybe about 3 minutes later, a white guy made the same comment.
Hmm.
And it was like everybody kind of looked around the room, which I really appreciated. And the person who was chairing the meeting actually came back and said, "Oh, well, Commissioner Davis said the exact same thing." And I was happy about that because you know what, during my tenure, whether I always had to be the one to say, "Excuse me, let me make sure we said the same thing." And I had to do that a lot to be seen and to be visible. So those things are still happening. And I think that you still have to learn how to really speak up for yourself and have the confidence to be able to say, you know what, I'm here and I will be visible or whatever, because you cannot shy back in this culture that we're currently in. You have to be forthcoming and saying, I am here.
Absolutely. So I think when we talk about this type of culture in a workplace, many people who may not be as familiar with the terminology may be thinking, well, how is this different than structural racism just in general? And I think I would put forward at least that when we're talking about colonization, we're talking about something very extremely aggressive and extremely intentional. So when we go back to the definition of the word, we're really talking about, yes, domination and control. We're also talking about exploitation, right? Exploiting resources, the labor, the talent of other people, other cultures. We're talking about the imposition of assimilation. So it's one thing when people choose to assimilate, right, for one reason or another. There's another thing when there is an expectation and there is forced imposition of assimilation, meaning even in the workplace, people are expected to conform to specific language. Maybe certain religious holidays are celebrated while others aren't. Certain cultural practices are acknowledged while others aren't. We're talking about in colonization, an establishment of a racial hierarchy. We're also talking about how, just in the true definition of the word colonization, back when colonizing happened here in our country, the colonizers sought to expand their territory. And I love that, the analogy of that to how we're applying it to the workplace. This is expanding their influence through conquest, right? Like by any means possible, no matter who has to face the detriments of this expansion of territory, expansion of power. It's about power and control, and it's institutionalized. And so I think, yes, we know there's structural racism in workplaces, but I think there are some workplaces that need to be decolonized where these things that are happening are very aggressive, probably very much institutionalized. It's part of the fabric of the companies and how they've operated for years. What do you guys think about that? Is it just, when we talk about decolonization, because I don't want to trade words and people not know really what we're referring to, do you feel also that it's something just a little maybe stronger and more forceful, harder to break than, listen, regular old racism that we're all accustomed to?
You want to go first?
Oh, go ahead, please.
I think it depends on the companies. I think there are some companies that are very inbred, and it's going to take a lot for things to change because they don't have anyone there forcing them to change, so they can stay that way. There are other companies where they have to change. And I'll give you an example to say, like, for instance, like at Northrop again, when we go out to suppliers, we have to go to so many minority suppliers. We don't have that's written in the contracts that we have to do that. But there are other companies that they don't ever have to do anything like that unless there's no one forcing their hand to do that. And I think as long as they're able to do that, they're perfectly fine. So I do think it's very difficult. That's not an easy thing to make happen. And if you are a minority working in a company like that, I think that you got to have a broad support of people that will come and help you to be able to survive if you want to stay in that, because I think that can be very difficult. And I don't think we should whitewash it and say, oh, you can do this. No, that can be very, very difficult. You have to go in there and you have to have support from a lot of people to help you maintain your sanity, to be able to stay and hope that you can grow there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that all workplaces are colonized. All American workplaces, sort of sticking to this context, I think they're all colonized just due to the colonization in our country, right? Of course, the extent to which they are colonized may be different and may vary from place to place, but I think when you talk about sort of the, how powerful is it? I think part of the power of colonization in all its manifestations, right? In the workplace, academia, wherever it may be, I think is in the fact that it could be either overt or covert, right? And I think it is insidious in that way, to where so many times we are unable, or in some folks' cases, unwilling to call the thing, right? To call it, hey, this particular characteristic that this workplace or that this person is exhibiting is a symptom of colonization, or this is a colonized behavior, a colonized attitude. And so until we're willing to call the thing that it is, right? Name it, and be just really be clear about that, be authentic, and hey, these absolutely are qualities of colonization. Your sense of urgency, some of the things I talked about before, worship of the written word, stuff like that we may try to label as professionalism, or we put other titles on it. They are all legacies of colonialism and types of and manifestations of colonization. And so it absolutely is powerful. I think its relationship to systemic racism or systemic oppression overall, just not even just systemic racism, is clear in the sense that it's a byproduct, right? It's part of how we got here. But yeah, the power in many ways, I think, is in its ability to be both extremely visible and also sort of invisible at the same time.
But Christy, I
Absolutely.
want to say one other thing. Under this cultural assimilation, I can't say the word. Um, there are a lot of companies now that I know have affinity groups, and I think some of them can be very strong in helping to make sure that there is a better understanding of different religions, practices, and those types of things. So I do think that's something that's a good thing, but it needs to be supported by top leadership of the company to be effective rather than being something that's a check on the box, like, okay, it's Asian week and we're going to look at the dragon ships or whatever. You know, there really needs to be something that we're invested in this and we're going to have a plan and a goal to make sure these are things we're going to do. So I do think there are some companies that use affinity groups that really can help that, but it has to be an effective affinity group.
I absolutely agree with you.
Absolutely.
And I've said
Yeah.
many times that I sit on the fence with the employee resource groups, and we actually will have an Equity at Work webinar where we'll talk about them in more detail. I just, while I know the value of them when done right, when supported, specifically from top leadership, I also feel like it's not the burden of the marginalized people to have to come in and, you know, necessarily take on the responsibility of changing the culture, right? And building their own inclusion. So I sit on the fence. You know, one day I'm for them, the next day I'm like, it seems like
You know what?
passing the buck.
If you don't take responsibility to go in and build it for yourself,
You're right. See,
they're never going to build it for you. So you have to be forceful sometimes in that because they're very comfortable being just who they are. I hate to say
you're
it.
absolutely right. But I might need a little stipend or something as I leave the employee resource group work. We're going to ask those who are watching with us tonight, if you have experiences that you'd like to share, drop them in the chat or questions for our panelists. We'd love for you to contribute and to share your lived experience as well. So let's talk about the value proposition for corporations, right? Because without the decolonization of corporate culture, companies do not stand to succeed. Now, they may not realize that, right? And so sometimes we may have allies on the call who are here to learn, and we want to make sure that we paint a clear picture of the detriments of a workplace where colonial culture prevails. And the first one is, of course, exclusion, right? When you have employees from different communities and they don't feel valued and they don't feel included, that usually they're being undervalued tends to lead to lower productivity, lower job satisfaction, turnover, lack of retention, and these kind of things. So what do we think about how colonial behavior leads to exclusion and marginalization? And what the bottom line that presents for companies, because a lot of times we have to speak in the language that they value, right? So we're talking about how detrimental these behaviors are to the success of running an organization effectively.
Yeah, I think it's all the things that you just listed, whether, retention, recruitment, employee burnout, productivity, just general employee satisfaction, employee engagement, all these different impacts in the workplace, in addition to just the humanitarian aspect of it, which I know is not always going to be as persuasive as the financial bottom line for workplace for employers. But I think when they have a better understanding of uh, what it actually means when we're talking about decolonizing the workplace and how that sort of maybe fits in or meshes with initiatives that kind of just generally make sense, I think that's sort of a foot in the door to creating change. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure that a lot of employers are going to want to dismantle the systems that they have, right? I mean, there is a benefit to certain groups to maintain the status quo. It might not be to our benefit as Black folks within the system. Well, it's not to our benefit. But there are benefits to keeping things as they are to other people. So then how do we package, and it's sort of a question that so many of us are still grappling, how do we package decolonization in a way that actually is going to lift the organization, lift the company as a whole, when you have so many folks who are currently benefiting from the way things are currently and from not dismantling or restructuring the
Right.
system, which ultimately is the foundation of decolonizing.
Right,
So
absolutely.
I want to go on a little bit of a different direction here on this. One of the things that I think that, and what you both said is very true. There will be people, they will get burned out. They'll be very upset with what they are. I find that we need to understand what the compensation is for the particular job that we're doing. Because I find a lot of times we are not being compensated the same way as the majority are being compensated. And as a result of that, you do get burned out, you do get tired, you do that. So there's another whole element there that we need to look at to be able to say we're going to get on equal footing. Because if you get on equal footing with pay and you're in those meetings making a decision and you are helping the bottom line, then you are getting a seat. But there are so many people that work right now that do get burned out. So they're not getting paid. They're not getting paid the equal pay of their peers. And that's something I know sometimes people don't like to talk about, but I used to always tell people, go to your HR, find out how much you're getting paid, because if you find out that you're making so much less than what the same job that you're doing, of course you get tired. You know what, you're going to. And that happens a lot. That's that power part where there are people there that make a lot more and you don't even know it. And you're working so hard thinking that you're going to be able to move along or get there. And you would work harder if you were getting the same amount of money and you knew that. But then you find that out and then you do leave. And then people do leave. And I think that causes that's the problem of whatever, but that's all part of that power structure to keep you in your place.
It's all a part of the power dynamic, and I agree that the inequity shows up not just in pay disparity. We know that's a thing, right? We know that there's pay disparity between genders, certainly for racial and ethnic minorities, but it doesn't even just stop at pay, right? In the workplace, we're talking about inequity existing in resources. There are many people who are in positions who are under resourced, which makes it difficult for them to succeed and to meet and exceed goals for their position. They are under resourced and treated inequitably in their opportunities, right? So now we're talking about the average Black woman has to leave a job before she's ever promoted. That's a statistic. These are facts, right? Because we're not given the same opportunities as our counterparts. And then certainly even in positions that are equivalent to our peers, we are not given the same decision-making authority. So compensation and all of these other ways that we're under-resourced, are all part of the power dynamic that make up a colonialized workplace. Any other thoughts? So we're also talking about companies facing the fact that until they start to take the hard steps, right, toward this work, of course, we always talk about how they have limitations on contributions from people, from diverse people, right? We don't bring our best selves to these type of work environments, even when we intend to, like Janetta, I think was saying, when we intend to bring our best selves, usually when we start to realize, right, it's human nature, the nature of the abusive structures in place, you start to lose our talents and our creativity and our innovation. There starts to be more disagreement in the workplace, certainly more turnover in the workplace. The company becomes more exposed to, possibly legal risks, right? Because there are more accounts of hostile work environments. And then certainly the company and organization as a whole misses the opportunities for growth, right? To grow in moral fabric, to grow with the way the world is moving, and to become, more diverse and more just. And so there are detriments to maintaining this kind of corporate culture, even though we can agree that the power players certainly reap the benefits of this staying in place. So what are some of the answers then? We'll talk specifically about what Black people face in this environment, but as we're talking about a situation where an easy win isn't in sight, right? Because power concedes nothing without a demand, right? People who are in power don't want to raise their hand and give it up easily. What are the answers? What's the answers in your thought processes?
None of this is easy. It's not easy at all. I will tell you, in my particular case, when I wanted to become a vice president, I went to someone and I said, you know what is it going to take for me to become a vice president? Because I felt that there were other people there that certainly did not know any more than what I did, and I was much just as qualified as what they were. And so I did that. And I think that you have to do more of going to say, this is what I want to do. And that is not easy, but you do have to do that. I think you have to find people that will support you. And you all know about the mentors and all that, because you got to find like a sponsor or somebody that can help you. But I think we have to take our careers in our own hands. And a lot of times people will say, well, okay, but then, like I said before, once you get there, then you have to go pull other people along with you. And I think sometimes that does not happen.
Yes.
Because once you are there, to be quite honest, if you're the only one, it can be very stressful. And so you want to make sure that you do what it takes to make sure that other people are aware, our people, Black people, brown people, what it takes to get to that level. And I think that's very, very important. And therefore, you have to surround yourself with mentors. And they don't have to be in the company. They should be outside. Find places, just like Associated Black Charities. There's so many organizations out here now that help people learn how to deal in the corporate world. And whether you want to think it's political or not, you're wrong. It's very political. And it's not about your performance necessarily. It's also about your relationship currency.
Yeah.
Yes, and the people sometimes don't want to hear that, but at the end of the day, it is a lot about that. So one of the things I used to say to people is that, there'd be maybe some social event. You probably might not want to go because you may be the only person there, or maybe there's just a couple other people. Go to that event. That's the way you're going to have to get to know people, and they get to know you. And like I said, unfortunately, it's not that. I used to always tell people, I said, well, when we become the CEO of the company, we can just make all kinds of decisions how we would like to do it. And so until we get to that point, there are things that we have to do to be able to say, this is where I want to be. But I think you have to tell people, this is where I want to be. And then if they tell you you can't be there, tell me why I can't be there. And then if they say, well, okay, tell me the steps I need to get there. And then make sure you document that and keep going back to them and saying, okay, I've done steps 1 and 2. What else do I need to do? Because once you start to do that, people will pay attention. I will tell you that, because people don't normally like to have things in writing. But you start to say, what does it take for me to get to those positions?
Mm-hmm. That sounds exhausting to me, although I do know and agree with you. I've listened to you. Now listen, I have a lot of privilege now, right? Because I'm working in a different environment. But as I'm listening to you and realizing that those were the things I used to do in different environments, I'm listening to you like, why was I begging and asking and writing it down? But
because at the end of the day, you have a family.
Yes. Yes.
You have a family. You got to be real about it or whatever, and that's why I'm very big on compensation, because I feel like I used to go to say, I want my kids to be able to go to college and I not have to pay for them. Okay. Your kids all go to college. You don't have to pay for them, because that's why I'm big on compensation or whatever. So yes. So, you do. Like I said, I don't sugarcoat it to say it's easy.
No, absolutely. Dr. Andrea?
Yeah, it's funny that you say it sounds exhausting, Christy, because that's exactly what I was thinking. It is exhausting, and you don't always get a return on that time investment or on that emotional investment, on the general investment, right? Of trying to do all of that for yourself. And I think it's set up that way, right? The system is set up to, even when you've done all of those things that Shanetta was just talking about, there are still forces at play to keep you from, getting to that next step, whatever that may be. And so I think, I know when I look back on my own career, a part of what I had to eventually reconcile was that a part of, how can I say this? I think recognizing that even the desire to do certain things or have certain accolades or make it to a certain position, get a certain title, all of that was actually in and of itself sort of part of a white supremacist or colonial mindset, right? I recognized that while initially early in my career, you know, fresh face, 20 something with a PhD, like I'm going to be great. I'm going to climb this ladder and I'm going to get this really high position quickly. I realized after several years, do I actually want, or did I just feel like this is what I needed to do? And I eventually realized that it was the latter, that actually, no, well, no, I'm comfortable in the types of positions that I'm in. I want to do great at this role that I'm in, but I don't have a desire to move up, you know, or I don't have a desire to be at the top because that's not in line perhaps with other goals that I have in my life. And just sort of deconstructing and reconstructing what my personal goals were and what it looked like for me to be an effective player in the workplace was really helpful for me in sort of the overall decolonization process of myself, right? Thinking about decolonizing the workplace, I needed to decolonize my own way of thinking in so many ways.
Mhm. Let's
So
look
you
at
know,
some
it
of the
becomes
comments. Oh,
so
go
you know
ahead,
what,
Jeanette.
it becomes a personal decision, I think, on
Yes.
where you are and what you want to do. I used to tell people there are different times in your life that you make different decisions for where you are. You know, if you're young, you're in your 20s, you're maybe, I will say, maybe you're not married, you don't have any kids, maybe you don't have to worry about anything. So then you can do a lot of things. And then you get to a point that you have a family. Then you have to think about, okay, what do I do for my family? But then once your kids are gone, then you can make another decision on what you want to do. So I think a lot of it too depends on where you are in your life as to what you want to do or whatever. And then I know people that they love power. And you know what? The things that we talked about, yes, it was took a lot to do it, but they wanted to have that power. So you know, there are people that do like that. What you were saying, you were so tired. Yes, when I had to do that, to be quite honest, I was always like, you know what, you're not going to tell me I can't do anything. And that's how I was. It was like, you know what? No, I'm doing this. I'm doing this because you guys are going to let me be just like you are. Okay. I am not going to sit back and allow you not to, because if I did that, then what about all the other people behind me? I want to make sure that they realize, yes, you can. It's just that it should be easier. And I think that's where the problem is that 20 years ago, yes, it was hard. It's still hard now. It should be easier. But you know what?
Correct.
We go through these types of historical things that happen in cycles. And I think you have to make your personal decision on what you want to do as to whether you want to go down that road.
I agree. It is definitely related to your season of life. That makes so much sense. And it also relates to your value system, which I think some of the comments, and we'll turn to those, but I think one of the points you've both made is you have to determine what's right for you, right? Some people want to kind of work within the system to dismantle it and make it better. Some
Mhm.
people, you know, I can remember times that I wanted a title and I wanted to ascend and I wanted to be equal to not just my white female counterparts. I, you know, saw myself, you know, equal to and equivalent to my white male counterparts. And then I got to a point in life, probably around the kids, Shanetta, to be honest, where I was like, just pay me on the 15th and the last day of the month. Like that's what I need right now, right? Because my values shifted based on what was happening with me. Let's look at some of the comments and some of the questions for you all. Early on, someone asked if both of you could share a time and maybe one step that you've taken in your career to decolonize your workplace. And before you answer that, let me just say, while we're talking about the need to decolonize workplaces, Chrissy personally does not believe that is the obligation and the role of marginalized people. When I think of the need to decolonize workplaces, I hold the workplace responsible for that. However, if there was something that you did to contribute to decolonizing a workplace, please share.
Gotta think about that.
I would say for me, again, it was resigning was probably my biggest act. And again, maybe that was more of a self, um, an act of sort of just decolonizing my own life in general. But yeah, yeah, resignation as an act of resistance for me was perfectly in line with the decolonization that I was trying to employ in all areas of my life. But maybe thinking of a secondary thing that I did while I was in the workplace was really recognizing um, that HR wasn't going to be a friend. That, you know, HR is sort of an act of violence or a place of violence and exploitation, and sort of reframing what HR could mean to me versus what HR was actually meaning to the company or to my employer, what that would look like, what the consequences of that meant for me. And actually, you know, talking to my supervisors, talking to my peers, making moves in my personal life and whatnot in terms of how I showed up at work differently, sort of based on reconceptualizing HR. And yeah, because I think coming into the workforce as, you know, a person fresh out of graduate school, I had a different impression of HR than what I come to know of HR as now, right? And so really seeing them as sort of an arm of the employer, and actually a big tool of colonization within the workplace helped me to show up differently and more helpfully for myself.
So I guess, Chrissy, the thing I could say for myself is becoming the first female vice president at the company. And I also became the first female uh, vice president and general manager over a $3.3 billion worth of supply chain. That was something that I had hoped that it would make for people to be able to see that we were able to do jobs and to bring other people along. So that was there. But one of the things that did happen at Northrop that I did like, there was a young Black lady that started a program called Worthy. And we brought 10 students in every year from Baltimore City. And these were kids from underprivileged areas. And they had two mentors, a technical mentor and an administrative or business mentor. And we mentored those kids from the 9th through the 12th grade and even through college and offered them jobs. And I thought that was a great thing to do in the sense that these kids who never had any exposure to corporate America had a chance to be there. They worked during the summer the whole time, and they were given jobs. And to me, that was a way of getting people where you were talking about understanding where there were microaggressions, where people who came from marginalized community may not feel like they understood. That was a good way for them to start to know what corporate America was about starting in the 9th grade. It was a very successful program. I can't remember now. I know we had hundreds of kids that came through. So I thought that was one of the best things that may have happened to say, let's break the cycle there by doing that.
Okay. So
And I think I thought of one more thing,
okay,
just
sure.
because it was something that I personally employed and then tried to get others and my sphere to do as well. And that was having folks call me by my title during official meetings, because there's, look,
people that won't call you doctor.
there were people that won't. There are people that will flat out say, like, no, I'm calling you Andrea. Like, what? Well, let's. I didn't introduce myself as that to you. And so I then became an advocate to others, like, who had various titles, other Black folks who have various titles, to say, like, hey, I recognize that you might think that it's not collegial to go by your title or that kind of thing, but make sure these people put some respect on your name, because it's too easy not to. And I think that sort of shameless advocating for yourself, whatever it may be. In my case, it was a title because it was something that, you know, I was still dealing with imposter syndrome or still just wanting for folks to just like me. So that particular thing was a barrier for me. But I think whatever way you can begin to sort of shamelessly advocate for yourself,
Yes.
and also encourage others to advocate for themselves, perhaps others in a similarly situated situation, can be so empowering.
I think that is a great example.
You know, one of the other things too, just on a side note, talking about those types of things, like I said, I still mentor. And you know, there are a lot of times, many times you walk into meetings and there are people in there, you keep saying, my God, do they not understand what's being said? And you keep saying to yourself, it just doesn't add up. So I have a little joke now. I tell my mentees sometimes, I say, maybe there were some of those people that their parents paid for them to go to college. So, you know, you are working with a lot of those kind of people that are there too, or whatever. And if you feel that you know that you know that you know. And I think that's where you have to really make sure that you're shining, because there are a lot of people that are like that. They don't know, but you do.
Now, let me ask you both this. You've both worked in white spaces at some point. how Black did you show up to those white spaces? Or did you ever feel the need or decide to hold back who you were when you showed up? Were you the same person in those spaces as you were in church or at home or at the family cookout, or did you contour yourself the ways you needed to fit into the corporate culture?
I pretty much so showed up as my authentic self. Most people that know me know that, you know what, if I have something to say, I'm going to say it. And this is even very funny about the dress. You know, being in corporate America like that, a lot of people went in, they had all very dark clothes on, they wore all the time. I was very fortunate. I had a vice president who wore bright colors. Or so you know what, we came to work, and so we did stand out sometimes because there would be people like we get a little side eye every now and then because of maybe the shoes or something that we wore. But no, I think I pretty much so showed up to be authentic. And I don't think there may have been some times that things may have come up and where I would talk very candidly about culture, the differences between cultures. You know, some people would say, well, you know, what about this or what about that? No, I would talk about that. I had no problem in doing that. I felt very, very, very comfortable doing that, talking about culture.
Mhm.
So,
And
and
I
I,
would say, yes, in a similar fashion, because my doctorate is in race, gender, and crime. Specifically, I did a lot of research and do a lot of research on whiteness and the manifestation of white racial attitudes. I've always been very comfortable in the workplace, sort of talking about that, and folks who knew that part of my background were always fairly comfortable talking to me about sort of the academic side of that. Now, did that influence or did that affect or even relate to how I showed up personally, sort of versus, you know, my scholarship? I don't know if it impacted it, but I think has certainly been an evolution in my life for how Black, if you will, that I wanted to show up. You know, I think about times maybe early in my career when, if I were going to a job interview, I might straighten my hair because I felt like that was how my hair should look for an interview to be the most palatable to whoever was interviewing me. You know, now I got locks, you know, so it just is what it is. It's completely different. And I wouldn't straighten my hair even if I didn't have locks for an interview. But whether it is that, whether it is choosing to not code switch in certain environments. You know, that has been a big way, I'd say, that I've chosen to, again, just really lean into myself and show up authentically, deciding not to code switch. I'm just gonna, you know, we're gonna make it do what it do in this meeting, right? Like that's just what it is, and you all can take it how you want to take it. You know, not questioning my own intellect and not caring if they were going to either, you know, and just recognizing, hey, my credentials stand for themselves, and so does the work that I do. But yeah, I'd say those acts, there has been an evolution, but I've always, particularly because of what I spent so much time studying, recognized the importance of showing up as me and what that can mean, not only for myself, but for other Black folks and other people of color within my workplace. So there's been an evolution, but it's always a work in progress, right? There's always unlearning and relearning that needs to be done.
I asked that in particular because I do think showing up authentically is a way to start to take a step against colonization in the workplace, right? And as you do that, and as we see people do that, it lends itself to giving the opportunity for others that come behind to feel comfortable doing the same thing, right? And so when we fight against the forceful assimilation, it can start to disrupt some of the culture there. And I think that's certainly a way that we can all contribute to that when we feel comfortable doing so. This is a question for you all. As women of color working in spaces where men dominate the field, managing up to white counterparts can be a challenge. How have you navigated that?
I've always walked in a room with confidence and with my facts. Seriously, because you know, one of the things there is that um, you have to make sure that people feel that what you're saying is is factual and that you are very aware of what you're talking about. And that's one of the things that I found out, that part of it is just how you come across. because there are people that can come out and say there's a cat out there and there's a dog out there, and everybody will be, you can make it sound and everybody will believe that. So part of it is, though, really knowing your facts and coming across very confidently. Now, I would also go to the people that if I had issues with some of those guys that I was working with, I sometimes would go have one-on-one meetings with them and say, look, you know what, I didn't appreciate what you did. So you know what, I'm asking you to make sure the next time this does not happen. If it happens the next time, then I will say something. So I did that. I would go one-on-one. And then you know what? I would send them an email and say, look, that conversation that we had,
Our conversation.
for our conversation, this is what I'm expecting. And you know what? That kind of stuff, I know people, it works all the time because people don't like things in writing. And I wrote a lot. I wrote a lot every meeting, per our meeting. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me. And per that meeting, That's what I would do.
Any thoughts, Dr. Andrea?
Man, I totally agree with the coming into spaces with confidence. And I know it can be easier said than done, right? And I look back on times when maybe internally I wasn't feeling that confident, but externally you weren't going to know that. And so that is how I had to present in those spaces, particularly with white men who, there was just multiple power dynamics at play there. So yeah, that confidence, and then I think also coming with the facts, like you said, coming with facts. But I've always been able to say, and have always not only been able to, but always made it a point to also kind of say the things that maybe other folks weren't going to say. So while I came with facts, I also was the one to say, like, look, emotions are not the antithesis to the fact. Like somebody feeling sad or something like that. I did a lot of work with law enforcement. Like I said, race, gender, and crime is my background. So, this is not a place where you want to see a lot of folks crying or anything like that. But being a person to say, like, look, you can be having emotions is part of humanity, a part of being a person. And so not sort of shying away from that aspect of things, not failing to address perhaps an elephant that was in the rooms at the time, has been very helpful for me over the years. In addition to just there's some kind of dispositional stuff, like my disposition, I'm fairly even keeled, so I wasn't bothered by a lot of stuff that they did. I just took it as, what, I know how to move now, right? Or I know how to move differently, but you didn't know that I was bothered by that. But I think also leaning into my network, leaning into my village of others, whether they were folks who were in that particular workplace or just sponsors from outside spaces, inside spaces, wherever that look, friends, family, really leaning into the village of support that I had has been key to surviving in not only white dominated workplaces, but just in a society that is, run on white dominance.
Absolutely. So this asks a question about generational differences. And I always say this too. This says younger folks tend to be less likely to adapt and play the game. I think we are dealing with new generations of people who are going to resign, like you mentioned, Dr. Andrea, who aren't going to play the game, aren't going to follow maybe the path that some of us in my generation or older have followed to try to fight the establishment. What have you all seen in whether you're mentoring younger Black professionals or talking and interacting with them about how maybe a younger generation is starting to show up around decolonizing corporate culture, or if that's even a thing they even think about?
You know what? I think some of them may not even think about it because I think older people probably think more about it, like people like my mom, and my mom has a PhD or whatever, so she knows what that suffering is. So she really looks at it from her generation. But I believe that a lot of the younger people, which I'm happy about in a sense, I don't think they carry the I don't want to call it a burden, but like our parents said, you got to go to work, you got to work hard, you got to do all these things.
Twice is good.
Yes, I don't think a lot of young people. I see that in my daughters. I have one daughter that she doesn't carry any of that with her. And I like that because I think she walks in a room and she feels she's equal no matter what. And part of that is, I think some of what we've had, at least my age group, much older than you guys, my age group, is that we had a burden on us to say we just had to do well. We had to make sure everything was good. But I think that a lot of younger people who've grown up in more of a diverse society don't look at it that way. They feel like, hey, I'm equal. I can just walk in and I can do that. And I give you a good example of what happened. One of my daughter's friends who lives in Atlanta, and she grew up in a Black neighborhood, and in that Black neighborhood was very affluent. She always was considered to be elite. Okay. When she went into the work world, she was totally flabbergasted on how she got treated. But she walked in with, guess what? This is who I am. Because she always felt that she had come from an elite society or whatever, and she had never felt like she had been discriminated against in a sense because she grew up that way. Now, of course, she had to learn a lot with being there, but I don't think they bring that. I think sometimes some of them are walking in and saying, you know what, I'm equal. And if I don't like this, and if it doesn't work out, then I can leave. I will go someplace else. I will become an entrepreneur or whatever, you know?
So is that to be commended, or is that reckless? Because, one of the questions we've always pondered around how this new generation of empowered activists show up is, are they going to be broke?
I don't know. You know, maybe they're not worried about some of that or whatever.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
then you're gonna laugh at me. I have two granddaughters, and I tell people you call them leaders. Don't you know what? Don't call them certain. They're sometimes little girls. They'll say, I said, no. I want them to be called leaders, and that they know they can go out and they can do anything in the world. Let's don't put these labels or whatever on them. And I think that they would be able to do that because I don't want them to grow up saying, oh well, maybe because I'm a female, maybe because I'm Black, I can't do this or that. So. I think we kind of have to wait and see because I think some of these people some of the kids now, they may not worry about money the way that I worried about money or whatever. They just said, well, I just want to be happy.
Yeah, I think it's true. I mean, as a millennial, someone in their mid-30s, I feel like my idea of initially going into the workforce, again, what I thought my idea of a successful career might look like was really just not even something that once I actually deeply thought about it, like, was this something that I or is this just what I've kind of heard from, folks like my parents or grandparents, older folks around me? And so I can say that having that mindset of, I don't really feel appreciated. I don't feel like, y'all are going to put the respect on my name that you need to put on it. I don't think you're going to just all these different things that just was not giving what I wanted to give from in the workplace made it easier for me to leave. And again, totally recognizing that, yes, I have a lot of educational privilege to sort of back that decision. But still, I was comfortable to take that step. And I know so many folks in my generation and Generation Z, the generation behind me, pay is not going to get them to stay. They would rather have some other, they'd rather be, let's say, in a location they want to be in and be paid less than to be paid more and be somewhere they don't want to be. They are unwilling to go to certain workplaces or certain companies if they don't have flexible workplace policies, things like that. Like there are things that they're just not tolerating really. And to your point, Chrissy, does it mean they're going to be broke? I don't know. I don't think so. I think there's an entrepreneurial spirit and just the spirit of survival, even especially in Black communities. I mean, that we've always had that persists, absolutely persists to this day. And I'm seeing that manifest in so many innovative and amazing ways that, folks are looking outside that traditional workforce that I think so many of us heard, that hey, that's the thing to do. Get that good job, you retire when you're your 60s, you have your pension, Social Security. We don't have that reliance on that, or are not even sure if we're going to have those things, when we get to that point. So I do think it's just a different way of looking at work.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point of even about, I was telling someone, when I started working, we had health insurance that was paid for. We had pensions that were paid for. None of those types of things are done now. So that was another incentive for us, to be quite honest, because you had health insurance and you had that. But now you don't have that. Everybody has to save for themselves. So, like I said, I think that young people will make a decision on, they'll probably be happier That's what I think. They may be happier in what they're doing.
So here's a question, and it says, is there a distinction in colonization, in your beliefs, between a nonprofit and a larger company?
That's a good question. Well, I think it depends on the nonprofit. So we could, I mean, because in oh, in like a large corporation, it's based on profit. You know what I mean? A lot of your metrics on how well you're going to do is based on your profit. Whereas a nonprofit, it is not that. And I do think it has to do with the culture as well of that nonprofit versus the corporation. So I
And the
think
leadership, right? Who's in the seat? Who's driving the top-down culture? Because at that point, it doesn't matter where it is. It could be a Fortune 500 company or a very small, small team somewhere, and it can be steeped in these issues if the leader is leading from that lens, I think.
I agree. That's a
Yeah,
great, I agree. The leadership.
agreed. Yeah. And I think, like I said before, I think there are elements that are really that go across the board, no matter what type of work you're in, discipline you're in, workplace, nonprofit, for profit, whatever it is. I think there are elements that apply nearly equally. But I also think there are various manifestations of it. So like, for example, in a nonprofit, I think a big manifestation of colonization that you might see within a nonprofit workplace culture is saviorism, like white saviorism. You maybe are not going to see that as much in a for-profit place. And so those sort of nuances I think are important to tease out because they will affect the Black folks and other minoritized people within the organization in a different way than you may see in a different type of workplace that has other sort of prominent manifestations of colonization.
So let's talk a little bit about what we can do, right? So we've talked two sides of this coin. That one thing we can do is not tolerate it and leave, right? And in many ways, in doing that, that also disrupts that culture, right? Because enough of the detriments of watching people walk out, losing talent, losing, the sustainability of your workforce or whatever else starts to disrupt. But outside of that, for, allies, for people in workplaces who want to stay there, who want to push equity forward so that they can begin to chip away and decolonize the corporate culture. Let's talk about a couple of steps they can take to try to do that. And the first one says, educate and raise awareness. To start by educating colleagues and leadership about the impacts of colonialism, as well as the importance of equity and decolonization in the workplace. Now, here we go again, putting the ownership on us to teach and to train and to raise awareness. Although I agree with what Shanetta said earlier, that, if you want it to happen, sometimes you have to be in the one to lead for your own inclusion. What do we think about how we can decolonize or contribute to decolonizing corporate culture by educating and raising awareness? What does that look like?
I'll go back again to, the first thing that comes to my mind right now is that the affinity groups can help do some of that. That's one part. The other part is that I think that when you go in and you're asking for some of these things, you have to make people aware of what you've had to do to get to that point. They need to be aware, and they need to know of a lot of the challenges that you faced that their counterparts did not face. And you got to say it. You got to write it. These are the things that I have faced or whatever as a result of. And you got to be honest and say, maybe this is an unconscious bias that you are not aware of, but let me make you aware of that. Now, one of the things that we did do at Northrop, which I thought was really good for a bit, we had storytelling, and we had a lot of the minorities. Like, I actually had to give the story of my whole life when I grew up in the country and what that was like and what I dealt with at work, so that people could have a better understanding of where I came from. So I think that those are the types of things that can help people to have an understanding of who you are, because there are some people, if you've grown up in white privilege your whole life, you don't have any idea
Yeah, no
about.
frame of reference. Yeah.
You have no frame of reference whatsoever of what somebody's been through. So sometimes I think you may have to take the time to be able to say, I need you to understand this is where I'm coming from. Or if you're bringing someone along and where we talked about before, that are not aware of corporate culture, then you have to help them, but you have to explain too, this is where this person is coming from.
Mhm.
So that there is an understanding there, because I do think sometimes you walk in, and like I said, if you've grown up your whole life with white privilege, you don't have any idea. You know, you walk into a room and everybody's talking about going to Europe and they're talking about doing this, and you haven't even left, you never left the city. So that's those are the types of things that I think you have to say to people. Okay, has nothing to do with your academics. It just has to do with what your
Your
exposure
journey.
level was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to.
Do we believe that Black professionals have the safety to be that vulnerable in the workplace? And when I
Yeah,
say that, I mean, if we start talking about our journeys and we start talking about our harm and we start putting that in the forefront, and I agree with you in many ways that we should do that, talk about our realities, but are there consequences to doing that that present us as maybe not as strong as we feel like we need to be at all times and not as capable? What do you think?
Thank you
no,
for raising that issue, Chrissy, because I feel like the answer is no. I don't often feel like that we have the safety to speak truth to power or to be an upstander for ourselves, you know, or to advocate for ourselves. I think not only the psychological safety do we not always have in these colonialized spaces, but or colonized spaces, but I think we may not even feel like we have general emotional safety or job safety to do those things. And so we have to really weigh the consequences of what may happen when we do these things, when we do advocate for ourselves, right? And we do speak truth to power, when we do call out, you know, unconscious bias when we see it, when we are upstanders, we really do have to think about, you know, what the consequences may be and if we are okay with them.
Mm-hmm.
I think also with that though, you need to make sure that um, you have other people that are supporting you. And I think one of the things that you have to do as well is that we're talking just about with what we do with Black people. You sometimes have to go find a white person
Mm-hmm. An ally.
that's going to be your ally to make that happen or whatever. And so that's another avenue that you have to do. And some people may not want to do that, but that is another avenue that you can go down.
I love also, I mean, not just because ABC does this type of racial equity training and work, but I love when we're brought in from the outside because I think it does provide a level of protection from the employees and we're able to say things and walk out, right? And there's safety in that. And you would be surprised, so many people invited me just this year to do presentations for their Black History Month program and presentations to talk about, you know, Martin Luther King Day and invite me in. And, you know, they expect me to come in and talk about Harriet and talk about Martin and celebrate the day. And I go in, most 9 times out of 10, I go in and leave the room stunned, in awe, and possibly wishing they hadn't invited me. And also very introspective because I feel like there can't be a podium I stand behind and not take that opportunity for all of the marginalized people that I have to leave working there when I walk out. You know, I've been brought in, and so I have safety in being able to call a thing, and to make life better for everyone in the workplace by being able to say things without the consequences, right? Maybe not being invited back, but even if you do this the right way, they begin to value the voice in a way that they don't receive it confrontationally. So I love when workplaces are willing to engage with outside consultants or outside entities to come in and do the work with them. Any other thoughts about initiatives to help decolonize corporate culture? What about policies, practices? Are we at a point in our DEI equity work where we can start to make demands about like real meaningful change in policies and practices within the organization?
So I think it depends on the organization that whether they can do that or not. Again, that's getting back to the leader. I think there are some organizations that, with the numbers and the backing of the people that within the organization and what they're doing, they can make changes, but it's the industry that they're in. Like if you're in sports, okay, so for instance, you're in sports industry, the number of Black people that are in sports is just the numbers that are there. They should be able to go in and make things happen because it's more of them there and they have the power of what they're doing. Like I used to always say, if everybody stopped playing football on a Sunday afternoon, what would happen in America? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I think you look at different places because there are areas where there's a lot of power that people could use to make the changes or whatever. In smaller places or in larger corporate areas, that's harder to do because you may not have the numbers that you need to say we can get together and we can make changes. And that's why it's important to bring people along, because the more people you bring along, then you start to have the powers in numbers to
Mm-hmm.
make things happen. So that's why I think it's just different depending on the organization.
Yeah, I think it's different based on the organization. And I also think I mean, look, and I'm saying this as a person who works in this space day in and day out. We also need to sort of decolonize DEI, right? Because there are a lot of DEI practitioners and a lot of DEI efforts that we're seeing throughout the country that really are just repackaged white supremacy, or we repackaged, colonization. It's perhaps them shifting some of the power dynamics, let's say from a predominantly white male team to a more mixed race team or mixed gender team, but it's still the same types of oppression and power dynamics that are existing. It's just now marginalizing someone else. And so I think until we sort of decolonize that, and again, it goes back to calling a thing and recognizing that some of these DEIA practices are not actually equitable. Some of these are again vestiges and legacies of white supremacy. I don't think we can change the power structures, which involve the policies and procedures and whatnot. And without that, then I think we're largely stalled. You have to be able to get to those to dismantle the system at large.
Absolutely, I agree with you. We're winding down a little bit, and I would love to give each of you the floor to just leave our viewers, I think, with some inspiration, with some guidance on how to tackle this as they confront it in the workplace. But I also want to leave you with this question to answer as well. Are there workplaces that just aren't safe to be? Right. And are we within our right as professionals, as qualified people, to start to point that out, right? Workplaces that have not shifted, that do not employ diversity practices, that do not show up as equitable. And, at what point, where's the blacklist, right? Of like, don't go here, right? Because they're not for it, they're not about it, they won't do it. Are we at a point where we should or need to call those organizations out? So let's start there. And then also we would love for you to give any other thoughts and reflections to the viewers tonight.
Okay, I guess I'll go first. I get, one of the things is I think that if we're going to call an organization out, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, they can be called out. I think that we need to have a backup organization that you work with to call them out. You know what I mean? It's just, so that needs to be in place. And you have to make sure too, you have somebody that can get in and get all of the information about what they are and what they are not doing. Because a lot of times companies, if they're not a public company, you can't find out sometimes everything that's going on with them. And then you have to also make sure you understand what diversity is, because, we're just like Dr. Davis was talking about with diversity, somebody would say, oh yeah, well, we employ XYZ, and they're really not brown, but they're considered to be a minority or whatever. So I think you have to be able to get the facts about the organization. That part I don't have the answer to, but I think you would have to get that first before you can start pointing out those companies. And I think that's very, very important to do. As far as, did you want me to go ahead and talk about?
Sure.
Okay. You know what, I'm hopeful with certain things that are happening. I'm going to go with something like that. Today on the news, I heard that Baltimore is going to start a HBCU fellowship program. in Baltimore City. So it's like, okay, well, that's great. They're going to go to HBCUs and they're going to bring them out and they're going to get a chance to work in the city. So I think that's good for them to be able to get that type of exposure that's there. Um, I am a true believer, though, that you do have to take your career into your own hands. And I know I come from that generation. So, and my daughters and I kind of disagree sometimes about that, but that's where I come from. Because I feel like if I don't ask, then who's going to ask for me?
Mhm.
And I feel like if I can ask and I can get there, then maybe I can bring somebody else along. And that's very important to me because I think you got to find a way to get a seat at the table. And that's the only way that we will start to make changes. And you have to get numbers at the table. And I also believe what I said earlier, you have to have allies everywhere. And that means whether they're white, brown, or whatever, you need to have those allies so that they can help you because there will be people that will do that. And then my last point that I will make that I made before, I'm very much about compensation. I know a lot of people say, "Oh, well, I don't need money."
Oh,
Well, let me
I
tell
didn't say that.
you, I didn't. No, no, no. I would say this. I was always. I tell my mentees right now, you get as much money as you can, especially if you have families and stuff. Because at the end of the day, no, money may not make you happy, but you can buy a lot of. You can have a better lifestyle. Let's put it that way. Whatever that lifestyle may be. So that's one of the things that always bothers me because I find out all the time that our lot of our kids coming out of college and going in, they make less money. And if you don't have money, you can't do other things. Like if you want to buy a house and you want to invest, and you need it more so now because you don't have pensions and you don't have health care. So that's my perspective, being my age, that yes, you have to have compensation, equitable compensation, you know?
Mhm.
I tell people all the time, and you don't believe me, listen, there are people that make money and for their bonuses, they get their whole check is a bonus for they
Listen, didn't
for
you
the
say you
week.
wanted to come back on the ABC board? That's my
So,
kind of thinking. I'm gonna
so
call you tomorrow.
so those are the things that's just my perspective, being my age or whatever, that I think that you have to think about it, whatever, because one day you are going to be ready to retire like I am. And you want to be able to live the lifestyle that you
Absolutely.
want.
That is amazing. Dr. Andrea.
So to answer your question about are there places that are just unsafe for Black folks to work? I think, yeah, absolutely, unequivocally, yes, there are places that are unsafe for us to work. I think there are also places that, even if they're not unsafe, we maybe just shouldn't want to for other reasons. Shouldn't want to work there for potentially other reasons, right?
Mhm.
And when I think about that, the table that Shanetta is talking about, making sure we have seats at the table, that is so important. But I also, on the flip side, what I've seen so much of, especially doing DEIA work, is that there are some tables that you don't want a seat at and there are also in terms of bringing other people with you. When I think about ways and my efforts to bring folks into my environment, whatever those environments may have been at the time, there are times when I had to recognize, no, I don't want to bring anybody here because yeah, I want folks to have a seat at the table, but this is a burning fire and I don't want to bring anybody in this space. And so recognizing that, I think is important too. And I think that's part of the community, that's part of the village, and having folks who will tell you that, hey, look, this is not the space. But I too, I feel hopeful. I feel hopeful about what can happen, the way these spaces can evolve, the way that we as people can unlearn and learn and relearn, um, and our ability to, as always, work with allies. We've always had white allies, other allies of color. I mean, that is how change has been made. It's been through the collective throughout the centuries in this country, and I don't. That's not going to change now. But one thing I just will go back to is just that shameless advocating for yourself. I think is so important. And again, I know it doesn't always feel safe or prudent to do so. So take that time to think about, okay, is this the time or is this the space? But know that if you don't do it at all, that's definitely not a good thing. So be your own best advocate and advocate for others who who look like you, who are in your space, you know, to make concerted efforts to not hoard power, but to share power, to be a sponsor for someone else. And I think those are sort of small steps that can lead to big collective efforts to, again, just dismantle this colonized system that we're all just trying to operate in successfully.
So, Chrissy, I
Absolutely.
want to say one thing. I saw someone that said something about said I just saw something at the bottom of the screen where they said this isn't worth my mental health, and that is very important. And I do want to bring that up because I know we didn't talk a lot about how stressful some of this can be, and I think that you have to decide for yourself because your mental health is extremely important. You have to decide: is this something that I'm willing and that I will fight for, or I'm willing to take the risk or whatever. And that's all a personal decision because every one of us, we're all different in
Mhm.
how we handle situations. But I think if you feel that you're at that point, then you have to say, no, you know what? No, I do something else or whatever. So and I think that's very important because a lot of times we have not talked about mental health, especially in our community, because we've all been saying, you got to be strong, got to be strong, you got to do this, you got to do this. And, you know, as women, we got to do this. So you know what? No, so I think that's very important. You do have to look at your mental health or whatever, because that is extremely important or whatever. So I just wanted to add that in.
Yes, and just piggybacking on that, I think it is part of advocating for yourself, knowing that it is okay to opt out, right? You're not a loser, you're not a quitter, knowing sometimes, you know what, this is just not for me. And
For
that
you.
is okay.
Yep,
That's
not
okay.
mhm.
Well, thank you both so very much for sharing your insights, but also your expertise and your lived experience with us tonight as we talked about decolonizing corporate culture. We could talk about this in 3 or 4 more webinars and start to chip away at even more perspectives. And so we appreciate both of you for sharing with us tonight. And for all of you who watched and joined us tonight, thank you too. For those who are watching the playback, we thank and appreciate you. And we ask that you join us in March, where our Equity at Work topic will be mentorship and sponsorship for Black professionals. And for Associated Black Charities, I am Chrissy Thornton. Good night, all.
All right. Good
Good
night.
night.
Thanks. Bye-bye.